Alright, as I said previously in the video I made about these bodies of flesh and blood, these bodies of death, I said that I was going to give you the second part of that passage, the second part of that mystery. So I'm going to share with you some revelation that it's going to blow your mind. So you be the judge. And my whole thing is that I got to tie this into the canon. The Apocrypha is very much part of the canon. It was part of the original 1611 King James Version of the Bible. And that's where I'm going to extract this information from in this video audio recording. So we're going to take a look at the wisdom of Solomon in the Apocrypha. And we're going to take a look at the first chapter. Towards the end of the chapter, I'm going to go over the information again. And you're going to see something that is going to pretty much mess you up if you're not ready to deal with this truth. So let's take a look. All right, here we have the Wisdom of Solomon, chapter 1. I'm going to read the last couple of verses of this chapter. Again, this is from the Apocrypha that was part of the original King James Bible. And I'm going to read the Good News translation of this Wisdom of Solomon because the way they have it set up, it's pretty interesting. It's much more enlightening. And it's very important that we read all the different versions that they have out there so we could compare them and begin to understand what it is they're trying to tell us. These books in verses, chapters, passages. All right, so let's take a look at this passage here where it says that God did not create death. So I'm going to read verses 12 to 16. It says in verse 12 that don't bring on your own death by sinful actions. Verse 13 says God did not invent death. As I said in the previous video regarding these bodies of flesh and blood, the Most High did not invent them. Not only that, there's a second meaning to that word death. It's not only referring to these bodies that decay, it's also referring to a being known as death. Hence why it says at the top of the passage, God did not create death. It's referring to a being, not just the fact that he was not involved with these bodies that decay. Okay, so it says that he did not invent death, and when living creatures die, it gives him no pleasure. Next verse, verse 14. The Most High created everything so that it might continue to exist, and everything he created is wholesome and good. It doesn't decay. There is no deadly poison in them. That is his creation. No death, the being known as death, does not rule this world. Verse 15. For the Most High's justice does not die. Verse 16. Pay attention to what it says here. It says that ungodly people have brought death on themselves by the things they have said and done. They yearn for death. Now, who in the right mind would yearn for death? Think about it. So, this word death is referring to something else. These individuals, they yearn for death as it were a lover. Who's going to love death? Nobody likes to die. So, they yearn for death as it were a lover. They've gone into partnership with death. Again, who would make a covenant that is going to bring death upon them? No one. So this is talking about a different kind of death. This is talking about a being. They have gone into partnership with death, and it is just what they deserve. So I hope you're beginning to see now where I'm going with this. I'm going to show you a different version of this passage here, okay? So let's take a look at it. Now, I'm going to read a different version of what I just read. This here is the Common English Bible version of the Wisdom of Solomon found in the Apocrypha. I'm going to go down towards the end of this first chapter of the Wisdom of Solomon. I'm going to read verses 12 through 16. This passage here has to do with death. And it says, don't seek death through the error of your ways. Don't invite destruction on yourself by what you do. God didn't make death, and God takes no delight in the ruin of anything that lives. God created everything so that it might exist, and the creative forces at work in the cosmos are life-giving. There is no destructive poison in them. Again, it's very important that I point out the fact that the creative forces in the cosmos did not create things or beings that decay and rot, alright? Everything they made to continue to live, to regenerate, alright? And it says here that the underworld does not rule on earth. That is pretty much obvious, but we see the influence of the underworld on the earth. It also says that doing what is right means living forever. Last verse, in spite of this, the unrighteous, the ungodly, called out to death by what they did and said. Thinking that death was their friend, they lost their resolve and made a treaty with death. Let them have each other, it says. Death and the ungodly or the unrighteous belong together. Pay attention to this last verse here that I just read. If you read it in context, using common sense, you'll see that the death that it is referring to here is not a literal death as we know it in these bodies of flesh and blood. It's not referring to something, it's referring to someone known as death, alright? Because nobody in their right and sane mind is going to make a treaty that would bring about death to themselves, much less think that death is their friend. Alright? So what I'm going to do now is read one more version of this passage here that I just read, so you can begin to understand that indeed the death that it is referring to is not a bodily death. It's not something, but someone. This version of the Wisdom of Solomon is from the Revised Standard Version. We're going to take a look at the end of this chapter here. And I'm going to read verses 12 to 16 again. This whole passage here is referring to death, as I said previously. And once you take into consideration that in the book of Revelations, chapter 6 and verse 8, one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, one of the horse riders, is known as death. If you read this chapter knowing that fact, it's going to read completely different now, is it? And most don't know that death is another name for Satan Lucifer. So let's read this passage and whatnot. Let's read it knowing that. So it says, do not invite death. Death is another name for Satan. By the error of your life, nor bring on destruction by the works of your hands. Because God did not make death. What? In other words, what is it saying here? It's telling us that there is a possibility and a good case that the Most High did not make the being known as death, Satan Lucifer. Wow. It says he does not delight in the death. Now this is talking about literal death, as in dying. He does not delight in the death of the living. Satan is associated with these bodies of flesh and blood, and he's also known as death, the pale horse rider. It says that the Most High created all things that they might exist, and the generative forces of the world are wholesome. There is no destructive poison in them, in the things that the Most High created. Now, people always ask the question, why would the Most High make Satan? Well, it makes sense that if he did not create him, right? Everything he made was good. So he's not going to make a corrupt being. It says that the dominion of Satan, the dominion of Hades, hell, is not on earth, for righteousness is immortal. Last verse, it says that ungodly men, by their words and deeds, they summoned death. Summoned means to call for the presence of someone. death is also a name for Satan. They summoned this being known as death, Satan. Considering him a friend, they pined away, and they made a covenant with him because they are fit to belong to his party. So now that you read this whole passage, knowing the fact that death is the name of Satan, or one of his names, it reads completely different now, does it? So the revelation that I'm sharing with you here, what I wanted to get at is that there is a strong possibility and there's a good case that the Most High did not create Satan, who is known as death. And now, another question that we need to ask ourselves is, if God did not create Satan, then who did? Okay? The Most High is getting a lot of blame for what Satan is doing. And by what we read here, it says that he did not make Satan, and he did not make these bodies of sin.